All right, so I'll create the semantic model through the Tom libraries, and once the model is deployed, I'll execute the Power BI REST APIs to set the data source credentials. So just a quick refresh to ensure that there are no semantic models in the workspace. All right, so we don't have any models, so I'll just create a new one. So I'll just use the previous source code that I used to create the model. And sometimes it happens that the username is not like visible. So I know that my credentials are already saved, so I'll just click it. So basically what I've done is that I've added a 2 seconds delay across each method. So that's the reason the overall process might look a little slow. So the reason why I've added the 2 second delay is to just like to be able to track the progress. The overall process is pretty fast, but just because of the 2 seconds delay, it looks a bit slow. Okay, so we have the models deployed. So now let's go back to our Fabric workspace, and yeah. So as you can see, we have the workspace, and is the creation time is the same as the current time. So now that the model is deployed, but as I mentioned in my article, so it's not possible to set the data source credentials to the Tom libraries. The credentials have to be set manually. So if we go to the settings option, so we have to go here. Oh, sorry, not here. Go to the data source credentials, edit credentials, and you'll have to set the username password here manually. So with the Power BI REST APIs, we would be automating that process. So what I'll do is that I'll just basically debug the code, the Power BI REST API code, and through each method I'll explain the how the code traverses to fetch the data source ID of the semantic model that we right now created through the Tom libraries. So I'll just add a breakpoint here. Yeah, before that, I'll just want to give a walkthrough to the settings. So this is my local settings JSON. So here I have defined the service principal ID, and here is the workspace. So the workspace, the Fabric workspace is my test workspace, and this is the semantic model name, and this is the database name. All right, and the scopes that will require is analysis.windows.net/Power BI, and you'll need dataset read write all scopes delegated permissions to the service principal. All right, so this is the first API call. So here what is happening is that it's going to loop through all the groups through this API. So I'll just do a quick F10. So now it's going to prompt for a browser credentials because we are for the bearer token generation. So now what is the browser? Okay. Okay, now if you will check the response, I have the response in my other monitor. Okay, let me just drag that here. Yeah, so this is the response of the API. So we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, we have like five, six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we have like 5 workspaces. So this is the workspace that we. Sorry, this is the workspace. Sorry. Let me rephrase that. So basically, it will traverse to all the workspaces and return a list of the existing workspaces on the tenant. All right, so this is our workspace, my test workspace. So in the so and here we're using JSON newtons of JSON. So it's gonna check for the workspace that we are interested in, that is set in the value of which is set in the local setting.json, which is this. Yes. And, so now there's a match, and it's gonna recreate the overall URL for the next set of API calls. So now our API call, the URL for the API call will be the the ID of the workspace. And now the next API call will be for getting a list of the datasets in that workspace. So since we already have the bearer token generator, it's gonna not gonna prompt for a uh, credentials. So yeah, so now it has the list of all the APIs that exist. Sorry, list of all the data sources, that data sets that exist in this workspace. Or let's say, so now we have only one data set. So that's the only semantic model that we have in the workspace. So which is this. So it's gonna give, trying to try. It's gonna like validate if that's that. Try to validate to the list of the APIs, to the list of the data sets returned against the semantic model. Let's put a breakpoint here. Okay, now we have a match, and it's gonna fetch a URL. It's gonna fetch the ID. If you go back to the response here, yeah. So this is the ID, right, of the. So if you look here, so there's this web URL, and this is the dataset ID, right, and which is same as this ID. All right, now that we have a match, then the new URL will have a ID concatenated to the existing URL. Dataset ID concatenated to the existing URL. So our new URL is this. And the next API call, what it will do is that it is going to find for a list of all the data sources that exist in that specific data set. So we regenerate the URL. So now we have a data set concatenated, data sources keyword concatenated to the URL. Now this is going to fetch a list of all the data sets, data sources that exist in that data set. So as there's only one, so this is the data source, and it has the ID against it and the gateway ID. So basically, gateway ID is a misnomer. It actually means the cloud connection ID. And this is the connection details. Just put a breakpoint here. Our new URL is this. So now we have the workspace ID. We have the dataset ID. So one thing I like to highlight here is that, so if you look here, so what we were using is the groups. All right, so we traverse through the groups, and then here there's no groups. All right, so basically what we have to do is that we have to first get a list of data sources and move on to a new set of API URL where we are using the gateway ID. So our new URL, we would be using the gateway ID. So this is the gateway ID. This is the data source ID. and here we don't have the data set because we already have the data set ID. So we no longer require the sorry, we already have the data source ID. We no longer require the data set ID. Right. Now the next in the next method will be patching the patching our credentials. I'll just step into this function. So I'll just skip on here. Yeah. So now this is the success status code. Now the response status code is okay. So it means our patch method was able to successfully patch the credential details to the data source. Yep. So I'll just end the execution here successfully with the response code. Okay. All right, so that's all. So basically, you'll have to keep a few things in mind. So first thing is that we are basically looping through the groups API to get a list of the workspaces, and once that is done, we then start to fetch the data sets. All right. So once we have the data set available, once we have the required data set, and then what we do is that we use the gateways API. Right. This is the gateways API, and we then use the data sources the data sources that we require based on the setting here in the local setting.json, and then we make a patch call using the underlying dataset id that we get from the data sources. All right, this is a bit confusing for because for me also it took time to understand like how to get the underlying data source id. So this is just like a couple of things that you need to be aware of. All right, so that's all. Thank you very much.